All right, so thanks for staying with us. But the government, the federal government, as we have it at this moment, is standing on three legs. One of those legs is fight against corruption in public service, and that is the conversation we're about to have now to explore the anti-corruption crusade of government, especially because it was yesterday or today that we are celebrating the international.
That was yesterday.
Yesterday,
right.
Yes, thank you. International, day, of fight against corruption. Let's go to Abuja. Malkwe has some guests to explore the conversation.
Well, thank you very much, Ayo. We have with us this morning Salahuddin Ashim, who is of CISLAC. CISLAC is a Civil Society Legislative Advocacy Center. You're welcome to Sunrise Daily.
Thank you very much for having me.
We also have with us Rashidat Okodowa, who's a spokesperson for the Independent Corrupt Practices Commission, the ICPC. You're welcome to Sunrise Daily, ma'am.
Thank you very much. Good morning.
Good morning. Now, where would you rate? Just yesterday, two important events happened. One was the launch of the new platform by the federal government, by which federal government parastatals will have to publish quarterly now monies coming in and monies going out of their systems, because some people have said the fight against corruption has got to be systemic in nature. We also heard there was a march by the EFCC yesterday. We don't know if the ICPC had one as well.
We did.
The march by the EFCC, which ended at the State House, where the EFCC did say that they have effected, I think, about 1,900 convictions and have been able to recover 794 billion naira. We don't know how much the ICPC. Perhaps you brief us on, the progress made by the ICPC and if it's in these terms as well. However, how would you rate, for someone who's watching on the part of civil society, the fight against corruption so far? Would you say we're on the right path?
Thank you very much. I think to start with, the fight against corruption must actually go beyond sloganeering, which I think is one of the fundamentals that we have seen happening in the last 5-6 years. I think the administration basically is committed to fighting corruption, but unfortunately they have not established certain baseline to really understand where we are at the moment, and of course use that as a platform, an opportunity to be able to build some level of anti-corruption infrastructure that will help them to engage very constructively.
Are you saying we're still at the level of sloganeering?
We are still at the level of sloganeering with some level of actions to demonstrate that we are moving. Look, doing so much does not necessarily mean that you are getting so much done. It does not, movement does not suggest progress.
But
and that is what we are beginning to see.
Should mean something, shouldn't
Absolutely, convictions should mean something, but I believe that beyond this administration, for instance, what I exactly at the institutionalization of the anti-corruption structures that we are having in place. Because beyond the fact that you are creating a system where it is just about a slogan that is actually tied to an individual, if you go beyond that, how have we been able to understand the anti-corruption ecosystem within the country, put some level of baseline, be able to develop some level of structures that will respond to all of these things, even 30, 50 years from now? I think those are the issues we have not been able to constructively do. And beyond that,
yes,
corruption in itself goes beyond kleptocrats that we have in the system. Okay, you must also begin to look at the issue of flagrant disregard to the rule of law as a corruption in itself. Look at the issue of nepotism as the issue of corruption in itself. So it is just about not somebody taking money. Okay, you also need to look beyond that to be able to establish whether or not you are making progress.
Okay, that will be an interesting addition to it, because I think that even Professor Wale Soyinka made reference to that yesterday when he, when you talk about the rule of law and nepotism and things of the sort. So, but for the purposes of this conversation, I think we would like to focus more on the aspects of fraud and what people traditionally consider to be corruption, which will could be bribes and what have you. We could always revisit that, but I want to focus on that because you're talking about the ecosystem of corruption. Now, some people will say that some of the things that government has put in place will be things like the Treasury single account, which should address systematically some of the lapses that we have seen in the past. Would you agree with them?
Yeah, to a very large extent, if you are looking at corruption, you also need to interrogate both the revenue and the expenditure side of it. And to a large extent, it has also, to a large extent, created some level of bottlenecks and bureaucracy in terms of financial administration. For me, I think the process was also not thought through properly to be able to ease business. Because one of the challenges also that you need to bring on board is the ability of the government issuing periodic and regular order of ease of doing business policy and order. But of course, you also need to
have been doing better on that, right?
Exactly. We seem to be doing better. But of course, if you also don't look at it to be able to disintegrate and disaggregate some aspects that will also challenge some of the progress you are making, then there will be a whole lot of issues to be confronted with. And I believe, for instance, if you have for the report that was launched yesterday, how have we been able to reorientate civil servants who are particularly going to manage this system in terms of keying into it and ensuring that this particular FTP endures for a long while is also something that we really need to begin to look at. So I have a very strong challenge, particularly with ad hoc policies to respond to the challenges that we have, rather than contextualizing them, looking at the fundamentals and responding to them structurally. Because what we have now in this country in terms of corruption is actually a grand situation, because even the last 5 years we have seen even milestone of corrupt practices.
We still have a grand situation of corruption.
We still have an issue of grand situation of corruption, and that is an issue that should actually concern us as a
I'll let you expatiate a bit more on that, but I've been seeing Madam Okodowa giving you, she doesn't seem to agree with a lot of the things that you're saying. What are your points of departure from what he has said? Because he has said, you know, the fact that we're making movements we seem to be making a lot of movements, but not a lot of progress. Do you agree with him on that?
Oh, definitely not. Rome was not built in a day. And we know that the issue of corruption in Nigeria is not something that happened overnight. It's something that's been there for a very long time. Let me also say that there is no society in the world where you don't have some level of corruption. We are working towards reducing the level of corruption in our country. He has mentioned, ad hoc things that will not survive, maybe the time, and not having the institutional infrastructure. But that's what we're building. When you talked about the TSA, you talked about, there's IPs, there's the GIFMIS. For example, what ICPC is doing.
The GIFMIS was the one launched yesterday.
No, it's always been there. It's always been there. It's the platform where you see government expenditure that manages, government expenditure. It came the time that, the TSA and IPs and all that. Now, what ICPC has been doing with regard to building an infrastructure or a kind of a system that will stand the test of time, that is not ad hoc, is in our preventive function. We have what we call system study and review. And we have taken that a level higher. We go into government agencies to study what is making them do the wrong thing. We just did one on about 201 MDAs, and we discovered, checking their expenditure pattern on personnel and on Capital Development Fund, what they had used, from 2016, 17, 18, what they had used the money for. And then we discovered that there's been some level of padding of certain institutions, salaries. But those institutions are the ones that are not on IPs. So you can see, by having IPs on ground, you have checked several who are on IPs, at least to a large extent, even though there are still issues on IPs in terms of some ghost people haven't gotten into that system, but it's not as bad as probably in the past. But the number of MDs that are not on IPs are the ones still going on with this infraction of padding their nominal rules. So you see, government, by putting IPs in place, has started something. Then ICPC is going to interrogate, and government has come out with they come out with a policy or like a fiat to say, get on IPs or don't get paid. You won't get salary if you don't get paid. ICPC also does what we call ethics and integrity compliance scorecard. That's also done across MDs. First of all, to be an assessment of how MDs are doing in terms of having the controls in place and complying with those rules and regulations. We study their management culture, their administrative systems, we study their financial management systems. And that's a quick snapshot to see who is doing well, who is not doing well. And then we publish. The result that came out, we publish those who are doing well and those who are at the bottom of the ladder.
There's a new...
yeah, there are new things that ICPC is bringing.
Because I was going to say that the ICPC was established about the same time with the EFCC.
In fact,
and
earlier.
sadly, we haven't heard so much from the ICPC, perhaps until very recently. But I'll let you respond to that. Let me quickly introduce our guest who just joined us while this conversation was going on. He's Dr. Amadou Jibril. He's of the Faculty of Law of the Ahmadu Bello University, Zaria, Director, Research and Production, Ambassador of Peace and Social Welfare Initiative. Doctor, you're welcome to Sunrise Daily this morning.
Thank you. Thank you very much. You're welcome.
Can you give us an overview of your assessment of the fight against corruption so far? If we all agree that one of the major problems, well, perhaps next to leadership, I don't know where it will rank, if you were to look at leadership and corruption in Nigeria, where would you say we are in terms of fighting what we consider one of the biggest problems confronting the country?
I think we've come so far. We've gone very far in the fight against corruption in Nigeria. But to assess where we are, let's look at where are we coming from. By 2004 and 14, corruption have done so much to Nigeria that everybody in Nigeria was just ready for a change. And it was under this climb, that wind of change, that this present regime came about. Now, if you look at what happened from 2015, 16, 17, by 2015, if you look at the recovery from the indices we've taken from EFCC report and recovery and all that, you have moved from 33 billion to 170 the next year, which was 2016. By 2017, it was 473. You can see a lot of progression there. Now, in another dimension, if you look at the conviction, this is from recovery point, because if you are talking of corruption, you are talking of two dimensions. I look at it from two dimensions. You have responsive measures and you have preventive measures. This government have done so much both in the preventive measures and the responsive measures. Responsive measures are measures taken in order to either recover or prosecute or penalize. Now, if you look at every sector of these two dimensions, there have been progress. From the preventive point of view, it was last 2 weeks that the chairman of ICPC declared that they've been able to save about 12 billion naira from IPPS alone. That is quite an impact. Now, from another dimension is that they've set up units, actus units across all institutions in Nigeria. In Ahmadu Bello University, I happen to be a member of few selected to be members of this actus, where we went through training under ICPC in their institute at Kefi, where we've been trained on how to oversee corruption in our institutions and bring it down. It was like a sort of training the trainers, and we've been doing that now in ABU. We've done to our ABU microfinance, and we're moving on from different divisions. That is from the preventive point of view. Now, if you also look at the responsive point of view, you have about 3 segments. You have investigative. It is on record that this administration have investigated over than 20 past governors. That is, we are talking of big fish. Now, you also have, from the prosecution point of view, you have a record of serious convictions that have been successfully achieved. Is it not under this regime that Jolin Yami, governor of Taraba State, was convicted? Is it not under this regime that Joshua Dadi is convicted? Is it not under this regime that recently Ojikalu was convicted? People expected Ojikalu would be exempted, but he was not. And this government have demonstrated its seriousness by the Senate President saga, where the third man on the hierarchy of government was brought to answer for some questions. That's serious. I think this government have done so much.
I'm going to bring it to you. I mean, because you definitely did not agree that we, we have made any progress.
Absolutely.
However, would you pick holes in what he said?
Absolutely. Let me begin with the Act 2 model that he had just mentioned. I agree, Act 2 would have actually been a very fantastic idea. But like I said, there seemed to be some little bit of challenge in terms of the conceptualization of Act 2. If you go to most MDAs, Act 2 are usually manned by lower ranked officers, okay? And this provides some level of challenge in terms of how they begin to demand for questions and demand for some level of accountability from particularly a director, a PAMSEC, and things like that. It is a very fantastic idea. And I must acknowledge that ICPC had put in some level of preventive infrastructure over a long while in terms of how to fight corruption. But the question is, how does this endure beyond this particular administration? And he had also mentioned something that borders around the issues of conviction. Yes, conviction is good, but for us, what we are asking is beyond that. After this administration, then what next? So we are not basically asking that issues of corruption should be a policy. It should actually be something that should create some level of social re-engineering, both social, political, economic re-engineering, begin to change attitude, begin to change behaviors. Yes, we have been able to put in some level of IPPIS system in place, but we still know that there are ghost workers that we still have endemic, that are actually creating wastages and leakages in various tranches of government establishments.
Are we able to point at the institutions?
Well, I'm sure ICPC has that details, and they're able to provide us with all of those because they actually have the mandate to put into public space some of those information. But the fact is that we still have all of those things in place. Like I said, there are marginal departure, there are some level of attempt, but the fact is, are they just things that are going to endure beyond the now? And that is what we should actually be hitting at.
I'll come to, we'll certainly come to solutions, how to move forward. But, Dr. Jibril, let me quickly take you on the general thinking.
Okay.
The common man on the street, as we like to say, and how they assess whether or not corruption has gone down, whether it is on the decline. For instance, are they able to easily access government services without having to pay a bribe to anyone? They usually assess sometimes the policeman on the street, is it still harassing people for a bribe or two? They still have all of these measures of perception.
Yes.
With those everyday commonplace interactions of the ordinary man with government institutions or government agencies and personnel, would you say that when you're assessing those parameters, that corruption is actually on the decline in those areas?
Yes, I think I also acknowledge what you said, because if you look at the recent report by the NBS in conjunction with the United Nations Office of Drugs and Crime, meanwhile, if you look at page 7 of that report, it acknowledges that federal institutions and agencies have improved, from federal judiciary and all that. If you look at the activities of the federal government on these sectors, on judiciary and all that, it has come down. But if you look at local and state level, it has remained flat. So that definitely will affect perception, because common man is in closer contact with states and local governments. So it's drawing down. Now, this is one. Secondly, you also have political problem, where in spite of all efforts by the government, in spite of gallant efforts by the government, you have people who are so determined to malign this serious progress made. But you've been in journalism, my sister, you know how it is. There is quite a world of difference between opposition in Nigeria and in opposition in other countries. And these things affect perception because the freedom they have and the way they do, it also, don't forget the fact that Nigerian popular opinion, the rate of literacy is very low. Not everybody can listen to you, listen to me, listen to him, and make a clear judgment. For instance, he was now just commenting about Actus, but I'm a member of Actus. If you take ABU, for instance, serious professor was our chairman, Professor El Ukenio, a respected member of the community. So, but you still have people who still think it is junior cadre of the university, of the MDS that have been listed. So this kind of perception, this kind of views affect people's perception. But I also will agree with you that if state governments and local governments will queue into these gallant efforts of the federal government, I think it will play down. And don't also forget, Nigeria have been there for about 60 years now. Corruption have deeply entered into eaten into our fiber like cancer. So when you have a problem with cancer, you are not going to take it out within a month or two. It takes a lot of time to exude it. So that's what we think about the perception. But I think this government is doing well. It has been opening, the transparency is embarking upon. Now, I think it will affect perception because I can see, even last month, the Office of the Federation have come up with what they call monthly or bi-monthly dialogue, where they listen to civil societies, open up discourse. So this kind of discussions, I think it will clear perception so that even pessimists among us will now really understand. But my sister, seriously, I'm telling you, if you look at the way we are fighting corruption, some of us in activism, we are redefining our activism. Our activism now is towards a vision of a new Nigeria, a Nigeria that is taking a completely new path from the path we've traded from 1960s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. If you look at the indices given, I hope you will have time to look at page 7 of that report. You will see the progress between 2015 to date. If you look at the progress in prosecution, you will see that from 2015 to date, Nigeria general conviction will have over than 1,600 convictions. Compared to the previous efforts, it was not. If you look at recovery, we have about 73% recovery.
Are these the only parameters we're using? You know, convictions and what have you? Because shouldn't we have other parameters?
Yes.
Because if we say that corruption is what has deprived a lot of our population of things like education,
yes,
of basic access to water, sanitary, sanitary facilities and
yes,
things of the sort.
Yes.
Health care.
Yes.
Shouldn't we be able to assess, perhaps with the progress that is being made with the abilities of our citizens to be able to access these things, whether or not indeed we are making progress in the battle against corruption?
I think
wouldn't that be a better parameter?
The parameter we should look at is how is Nigeria moving with this drawdown in corruption? Is it not, if you look at most of the progress that, most of the infrastructures that are coming up now in Nigeria, they wouldn't have come up under the previous set of arrangement. You can look at serious programs coming up. Calabar, across Calabar to Katsina,
I don't want to focus on one administration.
Yes.
Let us focus from when Nigeria return to democracy.
Absolutely.
In 1999.
You mean 16 years?
Is it possible? I mean 20 years. We're already in the 20th year.
Okay.
Is it possible for us to do an assessment? Because the EFCC and the ICPC, which a lot of Nigerians, look to today to help fight the battle against corruption, were created in the advent of democracy. We were created when we returned to democracy.
Yes.
How have they fared since our return to democracy?
I did that.
Shouldn't that be the question we be asking?
I did that.
Rather than focusing on 4 years.
I looked into that question.
Yeah.
When I assessed, I observed that if you look at the pattern of recovery from the take-up of that time to this time, 73% of the recovery is done in this period between 2014 to now. And if you look at about 27% is done between the period prior to 2015. So if you compare the margin of 73% here and 27% here, and don't forget we are talking of about just 5 years here.
Dr. Jubril, I have to interrupt you. I'm sorry. We'll
Okay.
have to take a moment now. When we come back, you've raised a very important point about what's happening at the state and local government, which is something I'd like Madam Okoduwa to intervene in when we come back from this break. Please stay with us. Well, so talking about the fight against corruption, and I still have with me in the studio Dr. Madu Jubril, who's of the Faculty of Law at the ABU in Zaria. We have with us Rasheedat Okoduwa, spokesperson of the ICPC, and Salahuddin Hashim, he is of CISLAC, that's the Civil Society Legislative Advocacy Center. Just before we went on break, I was saying that we're going to talk about, even though we're looking at new parameters, perhaps other parameters we should use to assess whether or not there is an improvement in the fight against corruption. Some people might disagree. They might think that convictions is the way to go. But some other people will say, perhaps in addition to that, we should look at what is happening to the lives of ordinary citizens and whether or not they're able to access government services free of corruption, so to speak. Would you agree with that?
Before I answer that question, let me correct an erroneous impression, that ACTUs are manned by lower level officers. That's not true. The guidelines, ICPC set up ACTUs in MDAs. The guidelines stipulate that it's only directorate level cadre that can head ACTUs, possibly. The other levels of membership, maybe the secretary or a member in another department, could be junior to a directorate level, but the head chairman would be a directorate level person. And in the past, we used to have officers of the same MDA be members of ACTU or head ACTU. But when we discovered that model wasn't too effective, we got the Office of the Civil Service, their cooperation in sending out a circular that we now have people from other MDAs manning the ACTU of an MDA. For example, you can have in the Ministry of Health someone else from another ministry being the head of ACTU instead of the staff of that particular MDA. In that regard,
I think civil servants will appreciate better what you're saying, and I will let you expatiate a bit more on that. But
okay, let's
I want
go
you
to
to answer the question. Yeah.
Okay, the question on whether we should use other parameters.
Yes.
Definitely. That's work in progress. That is part of me saying that Rome wasn't built in a day, because you start first with the law enforcement aspect. You start first. It's like saying that you kill one to scare 1,000. So you start first with the law enforcement, with the what were we saying now, convictions, the arrest, and all that, and then you build in the culture of reorientation. I agree that service delivery at the end of the day has to be the bottom line. And that's where the prevention that ICPC, the powers we have, come into play. Because now we're able to look at how do citizens access those services. Part of how the access and the kind of feedback we're getting from our efforts is the cooperation ICPC now has, collaboration with some MDAs, whereby it's even the MDAs themselves reporting their officials to us, because at the point of service delivery, they've discovered that they are doing what they shouldn't do. For example, our recent collaboration with the Federal Road Safety, called FRSC, we have, through that collaboration, we had arrested a number of the officials caught in the act. And thereafter, some of them had been dismissed. Some of them will be taken to court. So because of that, we had a similar thing with civil defense. And, there was a time when the head of civil defense came to report their officers to us. Now, as we go along, people will see the change in service delivery. Part of trying to measure the impact of how do I put it now? Those things that have macro impact on the economy, on service delivery. That is why ICPC, for example, went into the recent constituency project to see whether citizens are actually getting the benefit of what government says is spending money on. So it's work in progress. As we go on with this crusade, you will find that bottom line, especially what we are doing, bottom line is improving the efficiency and the transparency surrounding, government services. And in fact, what government has done or what government is doing in terms of putting infrastructure in place, going back to what he said earlier about infrastructure not being, things being ad hoc. It's not ad hoc. When government now is saying that, okay, this open treasury thing that was launched, the portal, when it says what we are spending money on, we're going to make it open to everybody, they will see those reports. When they have TSA, PIPs, GIFMIs, these are stock infrastructures in place by which government can be assessed by the citizenry, whether they actually, if, for example, you know that government gives so much to Ministry of Health every year, and then at the end of the day, it's not impacting service delivery in that sector. People can then begin to ask questions. But when you don't know what government is giving them and how they are spending, they can hide under the fact, I just use Ministry of Health as an example, they can hide under the fact of, oh, we didn't have enough money or something. So when government is improving its transparency mechanisms, and accountability mechanisms, down the line as we go along, people get more information, they can then ask questions. But then when we talk about service delivery, people also have to be conscientized to know or to start behaving differently. You find the average Nigerian will more readily want to bribe his way through a situation. When you say that policemen stop you on the road, yes, we know there are those bad policemen. But then I have an issue. Do those citizens have the required whatever it is they're supposed to have, documentation? Many of them will come out, drive without their licenses or something, hoping to bribe their way through. We also have to educate the public to know that before you can say you don't want bribery at those service points, you also have to be sure you are standing on the moral side of issues. So we have to reorientate them in that regard. I had a personal example once. I wanted the yellow card to get immunization for yellow card. And people around were telling me, just go and get it for 1,000 naira or something. Somebody will give you that. And I said, no, let me try the system. And I went to a place in Garki, National Primary Health Care, something like that. And I got it for under 500 naira. Legally, I got the vaccination. I got it for under 500. Then, it's some years past now. And under an hour. And I'm like, why then do people go and buy it's like our default position because of the many years of engaging with bribery issues and all that and poor service delivery. Our default position is let's look for corners. Let's cut corners. My child doesn't do too well. Let me just go and bribe my way to get that child admitted in school, whether they passed well or not, or you are below the cutoff point. No, let me just try and bulldoze my way through. We have to reorientate the public. Yes, it is the work of the anti-corruption agencies because ICPC has that mandate to be able to educate people on and against corruption. But then again, this is where civil society comes in.
I'm glad that you had a very positive experience with your yellow card.
Yes, I did.
Because I know that there have been, but I have had a negative experience.
I would
this
expect.
is with attempts to try and do the right thing.
Then you should then have followed through with have it continue.
No, you talked about default position
And
of many Nigerians,
yes.
and it's not without cause. So much so that even in many instances when you talk about admissions and things of the sort, people whose children have done well and know that they are well above the cutoff mark to get into whatever government institutions they're looking for them to get into, usually still have to know somebody on the inside to help influence things.
Okay, maybe what is missing is this. Maybe what is missing is people knowing where to go and seek redress for such issues, and also their own willingness to follow through a redress process. Because, of course, corruption fights back. The system is not going to readily give up on all the bad practices. Like, it's tough going with this anti-corruption crusade. So it will take time to get redress. But are we willing to see through? If I go and make a complaint, for example, about some service shortfall, are we willing to give it the time? Of course, there'll be sacrifice on the part of the person concerned, because it means you are not going to get that thing like this. If you're seeking admission, before you go through all the bureaucracy of getting that redress, maybe the season has all gone past. So there are all these issues involved. They have to know, I think there has to be, where can people go to? And then will the people be willing to follow through on the process, because it's not easy, but we have to keep interrogating, keep seeking redress for our society to become better.
I see that you were chuckling when it came to the part of the citizens, and our default position. Is it true that the default position of citizens is that they believe the system will automatically not work?
Which is absolutely untrue. I agree with. I actually empathize with her position because, of course, obviously you need to make a living. First of all, Actu has been on for about 5, 6, 7 years now.
More than that.
Would you kindly expatiate on what this Actu is?
And this Anti-Corruption Transparency Unit in some institution. And in NDDC, just one single man was awarded over 300 contracts. And of course, we are talking about the issue of prosecution and not looking at some of the infrastructure that you are making attempts to put in place to prevent those kind of situations. Now, take the same situation in NDDC, take it to some other similar agencies of government and see if there are not going to be similarities in terms of revelations that you are going to find. And that, for me, suggests that even if you make attempts to want to fight corruption, first of all, you must be very systematic about it and you must be very strategic. If you are not putting these two elements into place, the opportunities are there that what you are likely going to achieve would just be mere media prosecution and some level of marginal progress. Like I said, I acknowledge the fact that ICPC has made some level of attempt, but my learned senior colleague here alluded to the fact that citizens have taken position and it is an issue of opposition and all of that. And I think it is high time that we begin to look at issues of national discourse as very constructive. It has gone way beyond just trying to see any attempt to want to critique some of the intending or ongoing government position or system as some level of opposition ideology and all of that. And I think that is not very correct, because what we do and what other citizens try to do is to see how they can also offer some level of support intellectually to the entire pool that would help the system to get better. Obviously, every Nigerian wants to live a better life. If you look at the indices of what people get on a daily basis in terms of per capita income, in terms of all of these seem to be creating additional burden. Now, even if you look at the banking sector, for instance, and you look at the challenges that comes with several policies around deductions, the stamp duty, and all, these are all additional burdens that has been created on citizens. And look at the back end and see if what you are getting in terms of actual services demonstrate what you get in terms of there are a lot of gaps that are still in place in this country. You mentioned the issue of getting your... Just 2 days ago, someone was driving with the GPS. Somebody drove with the GPS and was arrested by the FRSC. And they said that because you were driving with the GPS on the highway, that it is some level of distraction, and the person was actually charged for that purpose. So there seems to be some level of challenge. And you have also talked about...
Are you classifying that as part of corruption?
No, I mean, how do you else...
Because
corruption
that is a little controversial.
No.
The FRSC already has ensured, I think there are rules or there are laws that prohibit people from holding their phone.
It wasn't holding.
While they drive.
The phone was actually attached.
That you put it in a holder.
Absolutely, which was what happened.
Yeah.
But the interpretation that was given to her was that the fact that you are using it in any form whatsoever, and that was the bottom line, that in any form whatsoever suggests distraction. And for that purpose that they were going to... And it was very clear that the phone was actually hung on the dashboard, but they said no, it was... So
that is interesting, because the reason I've taken up that particular instance is because the FRSC recently came out. There was a message that went viral saying that the FRSC says you cannot use GPS when you drive. Now, the FRSC came out to say that is not true. We're saying you cannot hold your phone when you drive, that it has to be in a holder.
Absolutely.
So this particular instance which you're talking about
and that is
very interesting. If indeed it was in a holder.
Absolutely.
And it was in a holder. It was
and
just on GPS.
And just to also take forward some of the things she had said. Look, you cannot fight corruption and have a national anti-corruption policies and plan without having a communication strategy around it? Because now he talked about the issue of perception. How would you also want to reorientate the people when you don't have a communication strategy around the fight against corruption, other than just ensuring that you lay in the public space some of the things that you have done? There should be some kind of strategic communication plan that you need to put in place that suggests that the fight against corruption is just not the administration's effort to actually confront, but the entire citizens' response to it.
I'm chuckling because remember when the Ministry of Information launched Change Begins With Me. And the uproar that followed that, about people, the reactions that followed that, saying that, change should begin from up above, not with the people.
Oh, yeah?
Where did you stand in that debate?
Oh, yes, because if you have that sort of two-way traffic communication model, it helps to... When people listen and see a clear-cut communication plan that you have. Now, there seems to be something that we are missing around citizens' compliance and response and following. It is about how leadership demonstrates the fact that they are particularly very willing to get into the entire chariot. Now, she also alluded to a few points which I largely agree. But unfortunately...
Which include?
Which include the fact that they are putting in some level of bit of infrastructure. Like I know that ICPC do some catch them young kind of programming in schools to begin to let young people in various anti-corruption clubs in schools to understand. And that for me is very essential, okay? Now, if you have that sort of essential approach to the fight against corruption, how then are you not putting some level of preventive mechanisms and framework that would not allow... In 10 years, for instance, we have lost over $1 trillion to constituency projects, okay? And you see some public office holders living above means, and you have a child who is in an anti-corruption club, okay, and sees this sort of situation happening in the society, and there seems to be some level of little response to... It is going to have some level of setback in terms of how you intend to capture that kind of young mind at that very low, tender age to be able to also comply with the situation. So, yes, there are some level of effort. We acknowledge that fact. But the fact is that they are not institutionalized, and they are seemingly issues that surrounds the current administration's effort and might fizzle out, afterwards. And that is the position I take.
Let me respond to those things. First, let me say from the beginning, when he talks about ad hoc things and policy, it's not just policy, it's not ad hoc. These functions that ICPC and other anti-corruption agencies are carrying out, these activities that you are seeing, are rooted in law. They are backed by law. So nobody's just going to come and then torpedo unless if that law, is repealed or something. Then going to the issues about prevention, whether you have the infrastructure in place. When we do the system study, and this Act 2 business is part of it, to see how vibrant the Act 2 is. And then, like I said, it's a snapshot of, now that we've published a report, and we said, some are, top liners, they are front liners, some MDAs, they are good in terms, they are substantially compliant in terms of ethics and integrity. That is, looking through their management culture, their financial management systems, their administrative systems, finance, Minister of Finance, Minister of Industry and Trade and Investment, they are the front liners amongst, a few others. Then the ones who are at the bottom of the pile, like education and justice, when we did that study, and they got their result, of course they were jolted to say, now it's in the public domain that education, Ministry of Justice, you're at the bottom of the pile. So that will speak back to this issue of service delivery, because now they know eyes are on them. And what ICPC plans going forward is, once we do such studies and we come out with a report, we'll follow up On those ones that are still weak, we have 3 categories of ranking: substantially compliant, partially compliant, or non-compliant. And then we follow up on the weak ones, both the partially compliant and the non-compliant ones, and follow through to see whether you are making changes. If not, if you still remain recalcitrant, first of all, we'll more or less impose a new system on you to say this is how you should go about the way you are doing things from here on. But then if you still continue your old ways, then we now switch over to the enforcement mode and make it criminal that you have not done. So these are the things we're institutionalizing as we go. Now that we have, you said earlier that ICPC seems now to be doing a lot more. We used to do all of this in the past. It's been part of our efforts. But the only lacuna had been that we didn't name and fame or name and shame. I hope you understand what I'm saying. So it wasn't in the public domain when we did a system study on maybe a particular NDA and we found them deficient in certain regard. We simply related with them, one-on-one.
Would you say that coming out to the open, making it public and more transparent, has had a stronger effect?
Yes,
on the behavior of the MDAs?
Definitely. Because as soon as the report came out, it was revealed at the summit we had at the Villa some 2 weeks back. The ministries, the headship of the ministries started, asking the ICPC, what do we do next? How do we, correct these issues? And so on and so on. Maybe while in the past, they might not have been directly involved because they would just say, oh, maybe some director should deal with it or the permanent secretary should do it. But we have ministers coming to say, you mean really? This is what we scored? And as a follow-up to the, as a consequence of the IPs thing we did, the personnel cost, not IPs really, it's just not on IPs. And we revealed, we've said about 18 billion right now, that we told government, in the words of my chairman, restrain the money.
So it's no longer 12 billion.
No, it's not 18. It's even more than 18 billion
IPs
right now.
has saved 18 billion.
Yes, not IPs. There are those not on IPs. There are still MDAs who are outside of IPs.
Yes.
So now, because of that exercise, they are now being made to join IPs. So Minister of Finance is capturing them now on IPs. But their expenditure, personnel expenditure for this year alone, we've restrained over 18 billion naira. Restrained, in the words of my chairman, meaning the amount was showing on the platform as money due to them. For example, salaries from January to July, for example. Government doesn't pay salaries in advance. It does it as it is due. So if I'm seeing on DIFMIS, that's this issue about institutionalizing and building infrastructure. DIFMIS allowed ICPC, for example, to see on the platform monies due to all the agencies, MDAs, because that's the integrated government financial management platform. Now, we see January to July, you are still having balances on your salaries. How so? How come? Because ordinarily, you should have exhausted your salary if you paid everybody. And nobody complained you didn't pay them. So how come all of a sudden you are having, like, say, 30 million, 50 million left on your salary for maybe a particular MD, and then it means it shows you had padded your nominal role ab initio, and then you've paid those who are actually on ground. That's the balance. You are now hoping to draw down doing other things that are not personnel related. For example, they'll be drawing down on such monies, using them for travels when they are not supposed to use that. So ICPC, in doing that, we brought out the report that there are health institutions, tertiary institutions, universities, and there's this talk about them getting on IPs. They are the worst culprits, and health institutions and tertiary health institutions. And out of that, a fallout of that, immediately we came out with that report showing a particular MDA had 900 and something million as surplus on its salary. Anyway, a whole lot of those tertiary institutions.
What MDA was that?
It's I think it's the Federal Medical Center by ELSA, if I'm not mistaken. Federal Medical Center by ELSA. I think so.
About
900 and something million. Yes, was the top of that corporate list. Now they came the following week. They had a meeting with the headship of ICPs, with the chairman and our director of finance, and then people from budget office and accountant general service to say, how did this happen? They explained. They said there are certain services government does not give them enough overhead for, like cleaning, security, outsourced services that they cannot pay from their personnel. So because government now doesn't give them enough overhead, they now sort of build some slack into personnel so they can do that. What we have said to them now is this: go and first of all make your nominal role correct. If you are 20 people on ground, don't come and say you are 50. Say you are 20. When you do that, for example, you gave government 1 million naira bill for personnel, when in actual fact, you just need about, say, 100,000 naira. If you tell the truth and they give you 100,000, it releases 900,000 for government to put back into your overhead. Government's resources are not unlimited. Okay. So when personnel takes a huge chunk, you can't do other things. So that's what we have told them to do now.
I was hoping to come to Dr. Jibril in this segment, but Madam Okotoa was not going to allow that. Let's quickly take another break, and we'll come back and wrap up this discussion in the third segment. Please stay with us. It's our final session now with our guest, Dr. Ahmadu Jibril of Faculty of Law, ABU Zaria. We've also been speaking with Madam Rashida Tokodowa, who's the spokesperson for ICPC, and Salahuddin Hashim is of CISLAC. Well, I said I was going to come to you before we went on break, but quickly, tell us, because a lot, I mean, as she said, has been happening at the federal level. Some people will argue that that's at the federal level, and it might not really make any difference to a lot of Nigerians who live in the states. You know, if this is happening, I think the efforts of the EFCC and ICPC will be felt even more strongly here in the Federal Capital Territory, even though, you know, there'll still be questions if you go on the street and ask people how they feel about the fight against corruption. Nonetheless, what would you say should be happening in the state? And I don't want to bring in this IPIS issue with ASU, because that is your constituency. And there is a big battle between ASU and the federal government over IPIS. You know, maybe you want to mention it, maybe you wouldn't want to. But my question to you is on the states.
You see, the issue, I'm more concerned from, most of my activities are geared from the vantage of my platform, Ambassadors of Peace and Welfare Initiative. We've been working with government, we've been partnering, because we have, as far as we are concerned, we have redefined activism. Activism doesn't mean necessarily opposing the government. It means looking at where we are, carrying forward from where we are. How do we join hands to carry on from where we are ahead? We are working out, though it's not yet perfect, but we are working out a program of enlightenment down local governments and states, and then local communities. Because if you look at the issue of corruption, government alone cannot do it. The issue of corruption is too important to be left in the hand of the government alone. You have cultural dimension. Nigerians need to be sensitized. For instance, deeply, if you take from religious point of view, Islam, Christianity do not condone corruption. But corruption have so much taken over Nigerian space that these moral restraints are no longer there. So how do we kickstart?
When you say cultural, though, what do you mean? Are you talking about our traditional cultures or what?
Yes. Our culture in our community, people are now taking success to mean amassing wealth through all corrupt means. People are not having that sense of, what do you call it, from corruption. People are not shying away from corruption. They don't they don't see it as something, as something that affects them.
In other words, our society rewards corruption.
Thank you very much. It rewards corruption, and then even in your local community, even in your family, people look at you and they gauge you by how much have you amassed, even if it's from corrupt means. Now, for you to fight corruption, you have to get down to the roots. Let the people know that this is wrong and this is done against them.
So the states, I want you to bring the perspective of the states now.
Well, I think
do you see work being done? I mean, do you see that drive being undertaken on the part of the states?
Some states, if you look at from this Kaduna state, for instance, I can see the governor coming up with some transparency mechanisms. This is one. Secondly, some states are still lagging behind and dissenting local government. But if you look at what federal government is doing these days, I think it will impact. One, this government has given autonomy to judiciary across the states. It will help transparency. Two, this government is trying to give autonomy to local governments, whereby their coffers will go direct into their... So all these issues of cutting off their resources from at state level, it will also play down. And then thirdly,
That's still a battle now between, I think, the federal government and the state governments over,
with the current
autonomy to local governments.
Yes, with the current National Assembly, I think it will go. Most of these challenges that the government have been having, you can see it has been overcoming most of the challenges. I don't think its bills will be delayed at National Assembly now compared to the wrestlings that I don't want to go into. You all know it. So
I'm sure
I think
Mr. Hashim would also say that could border a little
but my
on
sister,
the issue of corruption.
Before I close, it's very important.
Yes.
One other important dimension is from the activist point of view.
Yes.
Seriously, we in the activist platform must redefine activism. Activism to mean we must also join hands in moving the country ahead. Like it happens if you go to US, if you go to any country, they are country first. But in Nigeria, if you are not getting what you want, you are ready to disrupt the government, bring down the government. You don't acknowledge anything good in the government. A bottle that is
what you're suggesting he's doing.
Because I have actually acknowledged that there are certain...
We need to imbibe positivism so that if you have a bottle that is half full of with water, you don't say this bottle is empty. You acknowledge that.
It's all a matter of perspective.
Yes.
Let me bring you in on, you agreed with him when he talked about society and how it is that we view corruption, which could tie into how, Madam Okodua was talking about the people and our orientation towards corruption. Is it a problem?
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, I think one of the things that has created those sort of perception borders around the inability of government to be able to convince the people that they are particularly doing this in the interest of all, okay? Because there are a lot of political coloration to the conversation. There are a lot of conversation that borders around targeting some group of individuals and all of that. But that is not supposed to be the case. Let us look at some very constructive issue-based conversation that we need to take forward. One is around the issue of audit. You cannot fight corruption consistently and constructively without strengthening audits, for instance. We must go beyond transparency. Anybody can publish any information, but if you are not able to provide the back-end information to let the people know that after this information was published, this is the progress that we have made to suggest that this information can now be verified to have said this is the back end to the entire issue. The audit office at federal, state, and local governments need to be given priority attention. As a matter of fact, an emergency should actually be declared on the office of the Auditor General to ensure that their office gets all support politically and otherwise. And of course, the Auditor General's reports must actually be released also very timely. Sometimes that report does not get into the public space until 5 years after. And that in itself does not suggest the fact that you're actually trying to fight corruption.
And that is still the case today.
That is the case up until now. Because if you get there, you get the report in retrospect and not the report that suggests that you are getting just for last year or 2 years ago. You probably will get for 5 years ago and all. That is if you get in any way at all. And of course, you are looking at the issue of procurement. 70% of government wastages and leakages and all of that happen in the procurement sector. How have you been able to plug all of those leakages to ensure that you reduce them? Yet there are issues of observation and all of that. But I think that is where the ICPC actually comes in. You need to work very strongly with the BPP.
Definitely.
Yeah. So because yes, some of those things are happening, but the fact is that they are still very much at the very elementary stage where you still see all of these wastages ongoing and happening. And that is the second one. The third one is the issue of budget. Look, pick the budget of any sector now that we are speaking now, and you will find out that there are about 10, 15 same budget line, all costed for. And once it is legislated and appropriated, in the name of appropriation, anything goes. That person can take that money and use it for anything whatsoever. Because you take a budget, for instance, and you see very similar budget line items indicated with costs attached to them. And once it goes through and it is approved, that money is taken.
But a lot of the activism continues here in Abuja. What is happening at the states?
Yeah, there are quite a number of things that are going on at the state, and that is because it is easier. And I mean, when you say the issue of acknowledging, like, It is easier to say that at the federal level because of international dimension and because people at the federal level know that, yes, you have this slogan and people are actually watching and monitoring, they seem to be yielding. Governors have become very draconian and very power drunk that they don't even yield to whatsoever kind of request that you have. You have the FOI, for instance, and you issue the FOI to request information from a state governor or from a parastatal within the state, and somebody just doesn't want to yield. And that is because they don't see it, they don't take ownership of the entire anti-corruption campaign that is currently going on at the federal level. And that in itself is actually an issue that calls for a serious concern.
Is the ICPC, just quickly, is the ICPC just for the federal level?
No, it's not. That was settled since year 2002 when Ondo State government took ICPC to court on the applicability of its law across board. And the Supreme Court in 2002 determined that it is a law constitutionally made and applicable to all the federation, all the states of the federation. And in terms of...
So what level of activity have you been saying?
Okay, in terms of enforcement, we have had, when we say we prosecute a former governor, or we have had that application at state level of the enforcement. But in terms of system study and review, that power in our law is to be able to check any government body, their systems and procedures, to review them, to prevent corruption. That we have not devolved down to state level. We are still at federal government level because of capacity. We'll get to that in due course. Also, in terms of education, our national values curriculum is across board throughout the entire nation.
I have to interrupt you at this point because we have to go to Lagos and take a question or two. Ayo Akayode.
Well, yes, it's quite interesting, because anti-corruption matter is money matter. But let me begin by taking on, first of all, to inform or to correct that impression that the Auditor General's report is not usually ready until after 5 years. The Auditor General's report of 2016 is out. The Auditor General's report of 2017 has been released, and I think there is a stakeholders meeting on that before the week is over. But let me ask Madam this question, Mrs. Okodua. How useful is the Auditor General's report to the fight against corruption? You referenced the Medical Council in Bayelsa the other time, but that's just one of many agencies of the federal government that have been indicted. The MD or the DG or the chairman of these parastatals have been indicted, and no one has heard any action, being taken about them not returning money, running into, if we calculate it, maybe hundreds of billions of naira. How useful is the Auditor General's report to the fight against corruption by the ICPC and other anti-corruption agencies?
Of course, it's a useful component of the work that we do. And I know that there's a collaboration between the Commission and the Auditor General's office. In actual fact, I think just last week, we had the Auditor General and his team visiting ICPC to discuss certain areas of collaboration. But we know that when the Auditor General report comes out, it goes first to the Public Accounts Committee before it is made public and all that. Meanwhile, ICPC does its own system study and review. So at some point, there's a convergence of what we're doing and what they are doing, and then, to further inform the process for better transparency and accountability across board. So it's a very important component. And as I said, there is an ongoing collaboration between ICPC and the Auditor General's office.
How long does it take to take action on that report? Because just as Mr. Hashim said, if action is not taken, it will be assumed that nothing is going to happen to any report that is released. It's been 3 years now since the Auditor General's report of, 2016, the report came out this year. 2017 is out already. If we haven't had any action over the report of 2014, 2016, well, how do we know that any action is going to be taken? So how long does it take for the process to get to action points?
What the report does, it informs our own enforcement and prevention systems or functions in ICPC. When it comes to enforcement, which is what you are talking about, that how long does it take action against these people that have been indicted by the Auditor General's report, we would have to do criminal investigation, which will factor in what the Auditor General's report had revealed. But then, it's not what we'll take to court. We would have had to do, very intense and comprehensive criminal investigation into the allegations. And if we find anyone culpable, of course, we'll take a further action in that regard. But it also informs our system study and review, where we find that particular MDAs run foul or they are indicted by the Auditor General's report. Then that means we need to focus on the systems and processes at those MDAs. So generally talking in terms of how long it takes, it depends on the, intricacy of the issues involved. That would determine how long our investigation will take. You'll find that, okay, generally we're like in a hurry for results, which it should be, really. But you find that, some other crimes, it might take an investigation to very high cases or serious cases, might take as long as 3, 4, 5 years of, really building up the case. Because you don't want to take something to court that cannot stand test in the court. So it takes a while for investigation to be done. But be that as it may, we also are improving our processes such that we do a quick turnaround time on our cases.
Right. Now, this next question is in the form of a short story, and I'd like to ask Mr. Hashim, since he sort of represents civil societies. Now, a certain commuter bus was transporting passengers, which we call Danfo, was transporting passengers to their destination. And in that bus, there were 2 foreigners. Apparently, the bus conductor had charged them a transport fare that was ×2 of what he charged the Nigerians in the bus. Eventually, fracas ensued, and there was a lot of controversy. But this is a picture of what happens every day in Nigeria across different locations. Yes, I know the ICPC does, the usual enlightenment for students in school. But then there's another demography that they're not in schools. They're on the streets. They have their businesses, and they perpetrate some of this, corruption crimes, petty corruption crimes, but nonetheless, big deal. So the question is, how do we reach out to these people? Because it dents the image of a country. So how do we reach out to them?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think that is quite very germane. And of course, you cannot, if you recall when I mentioned earlier that there seemed to be some level of weak communication plan around the fight against corruption in the country, that of course suggests that there seems to be some level of nexus between what you have just mentioned and what that communication plan should achieve. That communication plan should be able to suggest how to reach out particularly both to formal and informal sector, and of course, look at the way to mobilize, to educate, to engage, and of course, to be able to begin to lead people at all stratas within the society to understand what government's effort should be like, how all of this should actually begin to re-engineer behavior, should begin to suggest how they should relate both to domestic indigents and of course to those from outside the country. So if you have people buy into that particular fight or campaign, using the communication strategy as a tool, then it becomes very easier to be able to get everybody on board and, of course, situate it within the context of saying that, look, this is not just what we want to achieve as an administration, but what government want to see its citizens become in years to come. And of course, this will now begin to change the mindset of the international community about Nigerians. Because this kind of special treatment that Nigerian gets, treatment in quotes, when you travel outside the country, suggests that this is as a result of the kind of reports they get from their citizens when they come back. So,
okay, Mr. Hashim, forgive me if I could just butt in for just a little bit, because we're going to take a short break any moment now, but we'd like to ask this one of Dr. Jibril. Dr. Jibril, you are in the academic community, and there's a totally different public there, students. Is there any way to instill in them from school, from the university level, about this, virtues of anti-corruption before they get into the society? Because ultimately they'll become governors, senators, House of Reps members, and all of that.
I think seriously, yes, this is one point that I think ICPC and others should now, I know I've been working with them. I know they have some programs relating to catching them young. But I think our curriculum should do something. I think we should think of coming up with a subject, or maybe civic education, in a way to capture this issue, because corruption have so much affected us that we have to come all out for it.
You believe that it's not too late to get into the universities?
No, it's not late.
It's not late.
It's not late. But
I don't know how many people share your optimism.
Yes, but
quickly,
yes.
Madam Okodowa.
I need to answer that. ICPC has had a national values curriculum, it's an anti-corruption curriculum in the educational system since 2004, when it was approved by the National Council on Education. But it got on stream in 2007, 2008. Students in primary school, secondary schools.
I was still in university.
No. We are just now. It's operating in secondary school, primary schools, and then in teacher education institutions. But then now we are moving into the university system. It's not a subject on its own, but you have elements of that curriculum infused in several subjects.
But there'll be huge questions as to whether or not we can measure the impact of the curriculum.
It takes a while.
I know.
I
mean, but the parameters will be very interesting. The parameters for measurement of effectiveness will be very interesting. I don't think it's something that will just be going on and we're not able to
We also
measure.
have anti-corruption vanguards.
Madam, I'm afraid we have to go.
And
we have to go, I'm afraid. We're totally out of time. I have to thank the three of you for coming on Sunrise Daily this morning. Dr. Madu Jubril is of the Faculty of Law, ABU Zaria. He's also Director, Research and Production, Ambassador of Peace and Social Welfare Initiative. Rashida Tokodowa is spokesperson of the ICPC. And Salahuddin Hashim is of the Civil Society Legislative Advocacy Center. Thank you very much for coming on Sunrise Daily this morning.
Thank you for having me.
The program continues in a moment. To take your feedback, which you consider very important, please stay with us.
And just before we go, here are some of your messages. We'll begin with this one from Omo Inyari or something like that. What your guests are saying is not an improvement in the fight, but an improvement in our ways of life, not forgetting the selective process involved and the change in the nation's economical space. All these make the fight against corruption a mirage. Nigeria still buys job placements.
Quite interesting. Next one is from T. Aremu. On the convictions and recoveries by EFCC and ICPC, it is about the type of cases and not just figures. Majority of the figure given are 419 cases in this case, and the cases of politically exposed persons are few.
Victor Owo says, I agree with Mrs. Okodowa. She talked about a ministry given a proper head count for accountability. This must extend to the country as a whole. How many are we? Let's stop banding figures, 180 million, 200 million. If we keep on this way, there will still be corruption.
And Adolphus Callistus says, it is very important that we know that electoral corruption is the worst form of corruption. If corrupt politicians don't come back, they will sit up. No corruption is worse than what happened in Kogi. That's according to Adolphus.
Baba King, 85. The level of corruption at the state level is unimaginable. Most of our governors acquire so much wealth from the state purse and still sit on LG funds in the name of joint accounts. Not until we make them accountable, we won't get anywhere in terms of development.
And Olagunju Oladele says corruption is systemic and structural in all parastatals, that's his emphasis, and government institutions. It's not just about financial abuse of power, beg your pardon, it's not about financial, but abuse of power through incompetence and entitlement. Apply whistleblowing policy in the civil service, especially when it protects subordinates. That's according to Olagunju Oladele.
Well, that's the much we can take on the show today. Thanks for watching. I'm Ayo Makinde. Have a wonderful day.
And don't forget, you can watch this episode, if you want to watch it again, and other episodes of Sunrise Daily on our YouTube page. That's at Channels Television. You get the best news and other events right there. I'm Kayode Okikiodu.
And I'm Maokwe Ogun Yusuf. Have a lovely day.